Hello everybody, this is Dr. Jessica Freedman. I'm happy to see everybody here tonight. We'll give people a little bit of time to show up. It's a very interesting time in admissions in general, not just medical school admissions, but in admissions as a whole. We have definitely been receiving a lot of questions about the affirmative action decision that was made by the Supreme Court of the United States that was released today. We've been getting a lot of questions of how that potentially impacts medical school admissions specifically. There certainly has been a lot of discussion in the media, more specifically about how this is going to impact college admissions. Of course, this ruling applies to everybody. Medical schools certainly have been bracing for this decision, as the colleges have been as well. And medical schools don't necessarily plan ahead all the time, because medical school admissions committees are often run by physicians and not dedicated administrators who are responsible for those tasks and for those processes. And so oftentimes these types of changes are kind of dealt with and addressed once they occur. So I can almost guarantee that, especially as we are about to have the transmission of verified applications to MCAS tomorrow, I can guarantee that these conversations are taking place. How are we going to be approaching applications this year? The MCAS application this year did allow students to identify race on the application itself, because the application was put out before this ruling. So how are medical schools going to deal with that information? Are they going to somehow block it out? Are they going to leave it there for people to be able to see? Is this going to impact anything this year, or is it only going to be impacting things starting with the 2024-25 cycle? We don't know the answer to this yet, but I can tell you that we are staying so on top of this that if there are any developments, or if we're seeing any trends with our students, that we will make everybody aware of those things. We definitely do see trends with our students. From year to year, we see how things change, and that certainly is one of the benefits of being able to work with us, is that our advice is often informed by the trends that we are observing in our students whom we're working with. I would imagine that we'll see some differences this year. We definitely saw some differences last year in other realms not related to affirmative action or any sort of race-based decision making, but I imagine we'll see something this year. And so certainly I encourage all of you who are not working with us directly to continue tuning into these lives, to subscribe to our newsletter, and just because we do keep our audience up to date. The AMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges, as well as AACOM, which is the Association for Osteopathic Medical Schools, have both come out publicly with statements that they are very disappointed with the Supreme Court decision, and that they still will do everything in their power to have diverse medical school classes, to have diverse medical school workforces, to be able to treat a diverse patient population in a culturally competent way. So we will definitely keep you updated on all of this as we start to understand more what the potential impact is for our students and for all pre-medical students in general. And of course, some of that will also be informed by what's going on in the college admission scene, because that tends to get more press because it's a larger group of students, and applications for college don't open up until August. So that application system will be able to now not include any identifying information regarding race. So they're on a bit of a different timeline. So we're also going to pay close attention to that, because if there are changes in that process, we can kind of anticipate and extrapolate that there probably will be changes in this process. So a lot of developments potentially in the next 6 months to a year in terms of how all of this will play out. So to start, I am going to answer some of the questions that have been posted on our Facebook group. And I encourage everybody to post your questions on the Facebook group every Thursday before these lives. I'm going to do my best to answer as many questions as we're waiting for people to arrive in terms of our live audience. So Sadi asks, what is the best way to find an ER tech job? No luck with job search sites. I often find that sometimes the best way to find jobs of this nature are to contact the hospitals directly, talk to their human resources department. If you're specifically looking for a role within the emergency department, you can also call the emergency department directly. So rather than looking at sort of job search websites, those job search websites, the employer needs to list their job on the job search website for you to be able to find it there. And sometimes there can be a fee associated with that. So there's definitely an expense for the person or the organization who's listing the job. So we recommend when you are looking for a position, especially if you're interested in working at a specific institution that's local to you, or if you're interested in working in a specific position, we recommend contacting the hospitals directly. And in general, this is kind of the best way to get opportunities. So if there's someone doing research in an area that really interests you, just go out and ask the question, are there any positions available? Students often will get better results in that way. If a student is not a math enthusiast but loves biology, is a BA in biology better than a BS in biology? It does not matter. Medical schools don't care if you have a BA, if you have a BS. Sometimes this is dependent on the institution. You can major in the liberal arts discipline. What your major is literally does not have impact in terms of your chances for getting into medical school. It may have impact in terms of having overlap with some of the prerequisites that you may need for medical school. So in that way, sometimes majoring in a science can kind of make your path a little bit simpler. Sometimes students who are majoring in a non-STEM discipline, they then have to take all of their requirements for their major, which doesn't involve any STEM, and they also have to take all their pre-med prerequisites as well as upper level classes, things like biochemistry and math. But it doesn't matter what you major in, it doesn't matter if it's a BA or a BS. Nital asks, we are aiming for BS MD colleges, and how do we find out cost of various programs, or any idea on approximate cost for Texas Tech and Baylor in Texas will help us. Also, are there schools out of state okay too where we can get a full ride? Heard about an Alabama school. Please shed some light on this. So again, when you are looking for approximate costs, it's best to just go right to the source. So for Texas Tech, for Baylor, just go right to those websites. They are going to have cost calculators. They are going to have information about scholarships. They're going to have information if there are any merit scholarships specifically. So there really isn't a reliable centralized database that I have found where you're going to be able to find out what schools are offering scholarships. And usually if you're talking about scholarships, you're talking about merit-based scholarships. So I find that the best way is to go directly to the school's websites and to seek out that information. For most college applicants, most are not applying to more than 20 schools. So that's a very doable task. For med school, students are often applying to many more than 20. So sometimes that's a little bit more difficult. But at the same time, there is a centralized database that lists all of the medical schools called the Medical School Admissions Requirements, and that will often offer a lot of great sort of centralized information in one place for all of the medical schools. Is it better to go into BSMD or to do BS in pre-med first? Are there any colleges in the Northeast or anywhere in the U.S. with mid GPA in high school and an average SAT score and extracurricular activities that are easy to get into? So Arathi, several things to think about here. First of all, there's no better or worse. It depends on how committed your student is, if they know they want to go into medicine, or if they aren't 100% sure if they want to go into medicine. Obviously, getting into a BSMD program sometimes has some tremendous benefits, because then you don't necessarily have to apply to medical school if you have a guaranteed acceptance to the MD portion of that BSMD program. I can tell you it also depends on which BSMD programs you're applying to in terms of how competitive they are. Certainly there are some BSMD programs that are maybe not as competitive as some of the more elite and prestigious and selective colleges out there. And some of the BSDO medical schools or the BSDO programs really are not competitive. So those often, some of them do not really require very high SAT scores, high GPAs. So there's a lot really to kind of sift through. There isn't really, kind of a blanket answer I can give to this. And in terms of colleges specifically in the Northeast, we recommend that you look specifically again at the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirements, because that's going to tell you which medical schools have BSMD programs. And then you'll also be able to look up what the average MCATs are for those medical schools to give you a sense of how competitive they are. And then as far as the colleges that are competitive, I recommend that you look directly at the college's website. That's going to give you the best insight. I'm just going to go to some questions that are posted in the live right now. If we parents have principal residence in Florida and my son has residence in Michigan, because we would have two homes, one of which would be where my son lives to attend undergrad, could he get into state preference at medical schools in both states? Michael, we get this question more often than you might think. And so in terms of what those state medical schools would require, we recommend that you call the medical schools directly and ask what they specifically require for a student to be considered in state. This does vary from state to state in terms of how long do you need to have lived there. Does it matter where you have a driver's license, things of this nature. So it's best to actually call the medical school in Michigan, call the state medical schools in Michigan to find out if he would qualify to be a Michigan resident if he decides that he wants to apply to those schools as an in-state applicant, as opposed to the Florida state schools as an in-state applicant. Okay. Renee asked, are applicants still getting off the waiting list, or is it too late? We had someone get in to their top choice medical school this week. Literally, I think the day before yesterday. We had somebody else who got in also to their top choice medical school late last week. So about a week ago, it might have even been when I did this live. So it's a trickle at this point. As medical schools reach their commit to enroll dates, they may take a student off a wait list at that point, but it's becoming much less likely. But certainly until we kind of hit that date when all the schools have filled all their classes, it's going to be much less likely. Now, is it possible that a school could have somebody who decides, I don't want to be a doctor anymore, I'm not going to medical school, and they drop out? I mean, anything is possible. Every year we have surprises, even the day before students start orientation, before they matriculate, there could be a surprise acceptance that a student wasn't expecting. So yes, it can happen. We're not seeing the same level, the same pace of waitlist movement as we were in May. We definitely saw a lot of waitlist movement this year, more than we have seen in past years. Is there any advantage of going to a top 5 undergrad for pre-med? This is a great question. And there really is not a huge advantage in terms of getting into medical school. If you want to be competitive as a medical school applicant, what is important is that you excel wherever you are in college. So that means getting top grades, taking the most rigorous courses, getting a high MCAT score, getting strong letters of recommendation, getting great research experience, community service experience. So it isn't as if you go to a top 5 undergrad or even a top 10 undergrad that guarantees that you're getting into medical school. There are no guarantees. Now, the top 5 to 10 colleges are sort of self-selecting for a very competitive student body, especially with students who are interested in going into STEM, who are interested in going into medicine. Those are going to be very hardworking students, and those are often going to be the brightest of the bunch at those undergraduate colleges. So those students, what I'm trying to say is those students are not having success in the admissions process because of where they go to college. They are having success in the medical school admissions process because they've done a great job in their undergraduate college. So we see similar results from students who go to, let's say, top 5 schools, along the same results as students who go to top 30 schools or top 40 schools. It's all about what you do as an undergraduate. And surprisingly enough, there are students who go to top 5 schools who don't get into medical school the first time that they apply. And sometimes that's because they think that because they go to a top 5 school that somehow puts them in a better position. And maybe when someone really looks objectively at that student's application, it isn't as competitive as, let's say, the student who went to their state school and saved a lot of money, or went to an honors program at a state university or a public university. So we do not feel that it's necessary to go to a top 10 school to get into medical school. Absolutely. I mean, a top 10 college to get into medical school. Okay, let me see what other questions we have. Good questions tonight, everybody. Okay, when do you expect AMC will start to verify applications submitted on June 5th, Judy asks. The AMC actually gives you a really good sense of where they are in the process in terms of whom they're verifying when, and so they'll tell you kind of what date they're up to, and I can search up that link and we can post it once the live is over. But I would expect, I mean, usually the students who are submitting at the opening bell, so meaning the end of May or the beginning of June, those applicants are often going to be verified really fast because there's just less volume, right? So now we're kind of increasing the volume that MCAS has to verify. So I would say that probably if the student submitted in early June, I would expect, assuming that there are no delays, that they would have a 5 to 6 week verification timeline. So very possibly next week, although it is a holiday, so that also could delay things. So we might be looking into the next week after that. Okay, Suzanne asks, was Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action today? Just wondering if affirmative action was ever a factor in medical school admissions. Yes, Suzanne, affirmative action was most definitely an issue or a factor in medical school admissions, certainly. And so, and I said this at the opening of the live, which you probably weren't here for, so you can go back and watch the recording. But we do not yet know, nor does anybody know, how the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action is going to impact the medical school admissions selection process. We don't know. The AAMC and the Osteopathic Governing Board, they have both put out statements to say that they are not happy with this decision. They don't use the word happy, but that they are disappointed, and that they are committed to having and to getting diverse medical school classes and to recruiting diverse medical school classes. So we really don't know how this is going to impact the medical school admissions decisions, in particular for this year, because this year's applications have already been made, and if you opted to indicate what your race was on that application, you had the option to do that. So we don't know if the medical schools are going to be somehow blacking that out so people won't be able to see what that is, or if they're not going to factor it in. We don't know. And I don't think the medical schools even know yet exactly how they're going to be navigating this. I can also tell you that there is a watch group, an advocacy group called Do No Harm, and they are most definitely going to be watching closely the medical school admissions decision-making process to make sure that the law is followed. I don't know exactly how this is going to play out. I think there are going to be different groups at every level of admissions. We're talking graduate school, we're talking college. There are going to be people on both sides advocating for different things. A lot just has to play out this year. So if you have a student who's applying this year, we really have no clue how this is impacting medical school admissions. We are going to have a better idea next year. So for students who are applying in 2024, once we are able to really observe the trends in our students and in students across the nation based on the data and the information that the medical schools put out, the AMC, AACOM, that once they put out all that data, once we see the trends in our own students, then we definitely will have a better sense of how this is going to play out. We do work with a very diverse group of students ourselves, so we certainly have kind of a window into this, and we follow the trends that we observe in our own students very, very closely. So we will definitely keep you posted as we see developments. Okay. Are there any undergrad majors that you recommend that provide students the best MCAT? So I'm assuming, Michael, you're asking what majors prepare students the best for the MCAT. And I don't know, honestly, if there's a specific major that prepares students well for MCAT. I can tell you that many students have trouble on CARS, the reading section of the MCAT. So it's possible. Most pre-med students are very sort of STEM focused, scientifically inclined, and many students, they have trouble on the verbal part of the ACT and the SAT. They might not be as verbally inclined. So you could argue that the humanities, being a humanities major, could help you on the MCAT where you're reading all the time. But you really have to pursue the major that interests you the most. So we wouldn't want a student to choose a major because they think it's somehow going to better prepare them for the MCAT. I suppose that chemistry would prepare you well, just because there's a lot of chemistry on the MCAT, but really it's taking those medical school prerequisites that's going to prepare you the best, and preparing as you would normally prepare for any standardized test, whatever kind of approach works best for you, and really dedicating the time to studying, which we recommend an absolute minimum of 3 months of prep time for the MCAT. That's what's going to earn you the highest score, and then lots and lots of practice. Okay, let's see what else. If a student is planning to take a gap year and do an SMP, when do you recommend they apply? If they apply before they start the SMP, when can they submit their SMP GPA? Archana, this is a terrific question. And whether or not a student applies to medical school before the SMP or after the SMP, when we're making those recommendations, we're really looking at the GPA and we're looking at the GPA trend. So let's say a student, for example, had a really strong senior year and they have an upward trend in their GPA. So they started low freshman year, but they kind of crept upwards. Then we might recommend that the student apply before the SMP. Every SMP will have their own procedure for when they send out those SMP grades. The more established SMPs like Georgetown really have it down to a science in terms of when they send those grades to the medical schools. And then there may be other students when we're looking at their GPA trend, and we may recommend, look, you only really have one strong year of a high GPA, and medical schools want to see at least 2 years of a strong GPA. And so we might recommend for those students that they apply after the SMP, so that way they have another year of grades behind them when they're submitting their application, which is always going to be a stronger position to be in than having those grades ahead of you. And then that they then use the gap year to further enhance their candidacy in some way. And again, we look at the application as a whole when we're making those suggestions in terms of what gap year experience this student should get involved with. It's not the same for everybody. Okay, let's see. Good questions tonight. All right, Rachana asks, what do you recommend for anything else you want us to know essays? I love that question. Okay, so usually For essays, is there anything else you want to know? Usually that's going to be an optional essay. Students have a very, very hard time. I totally get it, but they have a very hard time when there is a space to write something, even if it's optional. They have a very hard time just saying, I'm not going to put anything in that space. Sometimes less information is more. So if the student has submitted a really strong primary application and there haven't been any development since the student submitted that primary application, oftentimes we're just going to say leave that space blank if it's optional. If there have been developments since the student submitted their application, or let's say there's something for some reason they left out of the primary application, then we might recommend that they use that space. But almost always, a question that can be answered yes or no in that way with an essay is going to be an optional question. So most students are probably going to be leaving that question blank. They're not going to be writing anything for that essay. Robert asks, when is a good start and how to get a hospital or medical internship knowing it is difficult to get them? Okay, so Robert, the best way, first of all, we don't really think in terms of hospital internships. In terms of clinical experience, students are usually getting actual employment. They're getting jobs. They're working as medical technicians. They're working as certified nursing assistants. They're working as scribes. They're working as phlebotomists. And those jobs usually require some training, and usually you're getting those positions by contacting the hospitals directly or going through potentially a search engine, or sometimes where you get the certification and the training, they might be able to guide you in terms of how to find a position. In terms of getting shadowing, we often find that the easiest way to get shadowing is to just contact physicians directly, especially if the student potentially goes to college near medical facilities, and oftentimes undergraduate colleges do have shadowing programs that are affiliated with the undergraduate institution, and often have students who are doing programs kind of through their undergraduate college or university, getting some clinical exposure that way. And then in terms of getting research experience, that too, students are often getting through their undergraduate colleges and universities. They're going directly to professors to find out what research opportunities they might have, or if someone is doing research in an area of interest, either close to where they live, where they're living for the summer, or close to where they go to college, they're also potentially contacting those physicians, those MD, PhDs, those professors, and they're asking, do you have any possible work for me? Can I jump on a project? I'm pre-med. I'm really interested in being involved in your work. I find it really interesting. So if you could specify a little bit what you mean by internship, I'd be happy to guide you further. But generally speaking, in medicine, we don't really call them internships. So I'm just kind of clarifying that. Okay, Michael asks, is there a full list of BSDO programs available somewhere? You should. The AAMC is only going to have the allopathic medical school BSMD programs, but you should be able to find this on the osteopathic website. I can tell you that the osteopathic listings for medical schools, it's not as comprehensive as it is for the allopathic system. So sometimes you really have to search through every osteopathic school that you're interested in and find out what affiliated programs they have. So where the BSDO programs are through those osteopathic medical schools. Okay, let's see what other questions are here. It's a nice audience tonight, so thank you. Okay. All right. There is such a big national shortage of physicians. Why is getting into medical school harder and harder? I know, Rika, it sort of is counterintuitive. I completely agree with you. The reason is because there aren't enough medical schools. It costs so much money to establish a medical school. It costs so much money to train people to be physicians. So it really is an issue of economics. And we also are just, because of our population growth, there's a finite number of medical schools. There are a finite number of medical school seats in this country. And there just aren't enough spots to go around. And this is also why international medical graduates, people who have trained, who have grown up, who have gone to medical school in other countries, it's why they are coming here to get residency positions and why they are able to do that. It's because we don't have enough medical school applicants or residency applicants, medical school students and residency applicants, to fill all of our residency training positions here in the United States. So it's multifactorial, it's so complex, but I understand where you're coming from. It doesn't seem logical. I agree with you. Robert asks, are most students taking gap years? Yes. At this point, the majority of medical school applicants are taking at least one gap year. So every year, and we'll see what this year's medical school matriculation survey shows. We always look at that every year to get a sense of, is the percentage of students taking a gap year, is that increasing? And almost every year it's going up. So the medical school matriculation questionnaire is given out at the beginning of every medical school year. So we will look and see what that data shows this year. But yes, most students are taking gap years. We certainly have students who are not taking gap years, who are able to accomplish everything and able to do a great job and apply at the end of junior year. And they get in and they get into great schools. Most students who are able to accomplish that are just extremely strong students. They're very strong applicants because it takes somebody who is 100% focused and committed to that goal and doesn't take a break, right? So they're working every summer. They're studying for the MCAT after sophomore year. They're taking it by the end of junior year. They're getting in their research. They're getting in everything they need to get in by the time that they're applying at the end of junior year. So once you really look at everything that a student needs to do to be a competitive medical school applicant, you'll realize that most students, it's not that they can't achieve that by the end of junior year, but they don't want to, right? They want to take a little bit more time. And we support that for students who want to do that because it is a stressful process no matter when you go through it. So why not at least take a little bit of the stress off and at the same time make yourself a more competitive applicant in the process. So if any student is sort of willing to take a gap year, we usually encourage them to do so. Okay, let's see if there are any more questions. Okay, if one can get into medical school in the US, are there easier entry medical schools out of the country that can place in US residency? Another great question. Thank you, Michael. So yes, there are offshore medical schools where if students go to those medical schools, they can then do their third and fourth year rotations here in the United States, or they do them abroad depending on the medical school, and then they can apply for residency training here in the US. The issue with offshore medical schools is that some of them are very challenging. The Caribbean schools, you're essentially living in a third world country. There are different hoops you have to jump through without going into too much detail. And oftentimes, it's more difficult to get a residency here in the United States if you've gone to an international medical school. If you look at the National Residency Matching Program data, you will see that the percentage of U.S. citizen international medical graduates, so the abbreviation is U.S. IMGs, you will see that the percentage of those students who are getting into what we call categorical programs, those are residency programs that lead to board certification, you're going to see that the percentage of the students getting in to those residency programs is much smaller than students who have gone to med school here in the US. That's either MD or DO. So it's definitely doable. And have we worked with students who've gone to offshore medical schools, as they're called, and they've gotten into residencies in terms of the specialty they wanted and the program they wanted? Yeah, absolutely. Is it more challenging and is it a more difficult path? Absolutely. It's challenging. So you have to be a strong person, honestly, to be able to go to the Caribbean, potentially go to another country, come here to do rotations, and potentially moving for every rotation. You're not usually based at a single hospital the way many of the US students are. That takes a special person to be able to do that, and a strong person. So you have to factor all of that in. So let me just go back to our Facebook page and just see if there are any additional questions that I missed. Okay, so Tatiana asks a great question. We just found out about Casper, that some schools require. My son was unaware of it. What is Casper? How long does it take to prepare for it? When searching information online, we came across conflicting answers. So Casper is a situational judgment test. Medical school applicants are now required to take Casper. These tests were instituted, they're more evaluations than they are tests, and they were instituted several years ago. The Association of American Medical Colleges has one, and then there is a for-profit company that also has a version of the situational judgment test called Casper. We do prep our students for Casper, and that prep this year is going very, very well. We don't think that students need to prep for very long. They need to do some practice questions. They need to understand what the test is about, what the test is asking. They need to understand the format of the test. They need to become comfortable with the format of the test. I do have one video on YouTube where I go over some of the basics of Casper. We really discourage our students from stressing about Casper. I agree with you. I have searched for the information that exists online about Casper, and I agree it is not the best. Casper is a test where you have a very limited time to answer questions, and you don't have a lot of time, and so you can't write lengthy responses. Most of the things you're going to find online are not very good mirrors at all for the answers you're going to be giving for Casper. So if you work with us, we will prep you. We will make sure that you understand what you need to do. Our students thus far who have been prepping with us have been doing very, very well with Casper. So we're super happy about that. Okay, let me see. Okay, Jane says, hi, my son was a client of yours through the medical school application process. Great to see you, Jane. He is starting his 4th year. Congratulations. He has an opportunity to do an away rotation at a hospital school that has a residency program and a hospital that does not have a residency program. He is planning on applying to anesthesiology residency programs. Do you think doing away rotation at a hospital school with a residency program makes you a stronger applicant for that program? Absolutely. So when you are applying for residency, and I realize again, we're kind of, for some of you who are looking at med school PSDO programs, this is way in your future, but it's always good to know what's ahead. Doing away rotations, we call them audition rotations at hospitals you might be interested in training, doing rotation at that hospital can often put you in a great position, because then you're working with the people that you are going to be training with, right? And if they like you and they think you're a good medical student, they think you're going to be a good resident, then that can sort of bump your ranking on their match list when they're ranking their applicants. I can tell you that there is always the off chance that if they don't like you or they don't think you're so terrific, that can then hurt your chances when you are applying for residency at that institution. So you always kind of have to weigh these sorts of things. Sometimes it can help you, sometimes it can work against you. I would say, having worked as a residency admissions officer, I can tell you that I feel it helped more students than it hurt. Robert says, should you start reading and looking at the MCAT test? When do you start reading the prep books? Robert, this is a great question. We recommend to students, if they have the time, that they start prepping as soon as they've finished a class. So for example, and again, this is all a big F because a lot of students don't have the time, but let's say you take Gen Chem and Bio your freshman year of college. If you have the time to then study chemistry and you have the time to study biology, if you have the time to kind of get your books that sort of become your Bibles and your go-to sources, if you have the time to start studying those subjects and reviewing, I think that's a great strategy. Not all students have the time to be able to do this. I can tell you that most of our students don't do that. Most of our students are going to dedicate the time in bulk to study for the MCAT. And again, the minimum amount of time is 3 months. Most students are not studying in sort of that piecemeal fashion. But if a student has the time to be able to do that, that's certainly something that we would recommend. Okay, if you have some exceptional achievement in high school, award-winning research at a prestigious organization, should you mention it in your med school application, or is talking about any high school achievement looked at negatively? Ashwini, this is a great question. Generally speaking, when we are advising our students, we tell them not to include any high school experiences, but there are different things that we weigh. First of all, how many experiences do they have that they are entering on the medical school application? If you have a student who's applying to, let's say, medical school at the end of their senior year of college, chances are they're not even going to have the space to be able to enter that experience that they had in high school, right? But let's say a student is applying at the end of their third year of college, so at the end of their junior year, and let's say that they've been involved in only 5 to 6 activities very, very intensively when they've made big impact in those activities. So they may not have as many, they may not have the quantity of activities, but they have the depth. Then that student would have the opportunity, they'd have the space to be able to include that high school experience in their med school application. If the experience is truly exceptional, so it's something at the national level, it's something at the international level, that's the only time that we are potentially going to recommend that a student include that experience in their medical school application. Keep in mind that medical school admissions officers don't know what's prestigious at the high school level. So every level is sort of its own entity, and people only know what's going on in their specific arena. So for example, things like RSI or SSP, these very, very prestigious and competitive high school science programs, I can tell you that med school admissions officers, they don't know how competitive those programs are. So if you're going to write about something like that, for example, you're going to have to specify exactly what that program was, how competitive it was, so they get a sense of that. But usually students who are at that very high level of achievement, usually they're having the same high level of achievement and ambition during undergrad, and they're just not going to have the space to even include that experience. Okay, let me see any other questions. Another great question from Rowena. If I already submitted my MCAS application to a school but found out that they require more letters of science major professors that likely cannot obtain at this point, should the student still move forward with secondaries? The student has 3 from science, physician and community, volunteer admin. So, okay, so this is a great question. So if a school requires a letter of recommendation from somebody and you don't have a letter of recommendation, I'm assuming that this is probably a humanities letter or an English letter, something along those lines, and the student doesn't have a professor from one of those disciplines. We do encounter this sometimes with our student. Because our students are so STEM heavy, they sometimes haven't built those relationships with a humanities professor to get a good letter of recommendation. So what we recommend is that you actually call the medical school that has this requirement, and oftentimes these things are not so rigid, and they can see the quality of your writing in your application itself. They can understand how you communicate based on your interview skills. So those aren't always such steadfast rules, so you might call the medical school before just kind of deciding, okay, I can't be an applicant to the school, I don't have the letter. Just call the med school. Make sure that that's an absolute and that they literally don't want to see an application from you. Okay. What are the prerequisites for medical school who's coming from Canada? The medical school prerequisites are the same no matter where you're from. Okay. Jeff asks, if a school allows up to 6 letters of recommendation, does the committee letter count as one of the 6, or is that counted separately? Usually it's counted as one of the 6, Jeff. And if you have access to the MSAR, I mentioned the MSAR like 10 times in every one of these lives, but the medical school admissions requirements, it's an online database for all of the allopathic medical schools in the United States. You are going to be able to see what the letter of recommendation requirements are for every medical school in the United States, allopathic med school that is, and you'll be able to see what the committee letter counts as. But usually that's counting as one letter of recommendation. Okay, this was a super productive session, and I thank you all so much for being here and for showing up tonight. If you are not a part of our parents group, please join. Ask us one more question. Where can we find out the prerequisite requirements? Again, look at the MSAR. You're going to see all of the prerequisites for all the medical schools there. What they accept. Do they accept community college credits? Do they accept AP credits? Everything is there. What courses they recommend, what courses they absolutely require. It's a wealth of information. Anyway, and we thank you all so much for being here. If you are interested in working with us, we are still accepting applicants for this application cycle. If you have submitted your application, congratulations. We are super proud of you. As many of you may know, the first wave of verified applications are being transmitted to medical schools tomorrow. Stay calm when you start getting all of those secondary essays in your inbox. If you do want help with secondary essays, we will often start working with students when the secondary essay season arrives. And if you're applying in the future, please reach out to us. We often will start working with students even before they have started undergrad. So the summer before they are even beginning undergrad, just to make sure that they are prepared. And our team has a wealth of experience. Everybody has served on a medical school admissions committee or residency admissions committee, depending on what you are applying for. I have been doing this for my entire life. So I am a physician. I've served on medical school admissions committee, residency committees, medical school committees. I've taught med school classes, and of course through MedEdits, we have just learned a tremendous amount from all of you and from all of our students, and so benefit from our wisdom and from our experience. So I appreciate all of you being here tonight. Happy July 4th. I hope you all celebrate and have a great time. Robert asks one more question. It's there. I like it. I'm just going to answer it. Are essays very, very important if you have a strong academic background in MCAT? Essays are always important. Always, always, always. I can tell you that our students get great results because their essays are terrific. So even if you have the best academics and you have a top tier MCAT, you still have to have great experiences, and you still have to show insight and understanding about those experiences and write about the impact you've made and why you want to be a doctor. So yeah, for every single applicant, those essays are super important. And you can, I will find the grid, but you will see that even students, I think it's less than 10%, but, or maybe it's a little bit over 10%. It hovers around 10% of students with the absolute highest metric, the highest MCAT, the highest GPAs. You'd be surprised that there are some students in that little tiny group that don't get into medical school. It's around 10%, I think. Okay, Tara, yeah, the California North State University does have a BSMD program. We have worked with students. I'm just going to be completely transparent here. We've worked with students who have had issues with that program. It's not one that we highly recommend for that reason. There have been some issues. You can even just do a quick Google search for it and you will see, but we had students who supposedly were accepted to that program and then they were told that they weren't accepted. I think there were some lawsuits brewing about all of it. So if you do a quick Google search, you will find that. But we approach that program with caution. So anyway, so thank you all for being here. Thank you for all of your terrific questions, your terrific comments. Please post in the group if you have questions during the week. And otherwise, I will see you after the 4th. Have a terrific weekend. Have a great holiday, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.